briefing didn't change his views on how to deal with the Islamic State, whatever they may be. He says he will tell his generals to come up with a plan within 30 days of his inauguration, although that presumably won't be the generals he said Obama has now reduced to rubble. Apparently the CIA briefing did not include any information on the threat posed by Vladimir Putin, Trump's favorite authoritarian. Trump calls him a better leader than Obama because Putin has strong control over his country. He does, but the model is a rather frightening one. Having what purport to be elections for parliament in Russia today. And I'll bet you that Putin has returns on his party's side that will make Trump so envious that he will find it necessary to come up with another Putin salute. CIA briefings for presidential nominees date from Harry Truman's time. Truman came to office in 1945, not even aware of the atomic bomb because FDR didn't tell him. So he arranged for his successor, Eisenhower, to be fully briefed before he came to office. In 1960, that was extended into briefings for presidential nominees of both parties. Trump is the first presidential nominee ever to try to use those traditional briefings for campaign advantage. Since I'm talking so much about a campaign I'm not covering, let me talk a little about the campaigns I covered over the years, beginning in 1960. Those early campaigns had a human dimension that is long gone. A candidate could chat with reporters without cell phones, picking up every word and taking pictures. JFK chatted with reporters. He flattered reporters, even a rookie like me, by calling us by name. Richard Nixon didn't talk to us at all. I rode on an airplane with him for two weeks in 1960, and I didn't meet him really until 1965. Richard Nixon didn't talk, he didn't like reporters, and after the election he complained that reporters liked Kennedy better, which of course was true. Nixon was a man of many talents and of many flaws, one of them proving fatal. Human contact and small talk was not one of his talents. I always thought him oddly isolated for a politician. He liked public office, but he didn't seem to like the public very much. Bizarre comments and bizarre moments and errant comments that passed unnoted in the 60s and 70s are guaranteed television replay time over and over and over again. Look at Clinton's unfortunate fainting spill. It's going to be played every day until the election. With iPhone technology, everything is recorded. Everything wasn't then. Besides, security in the 60s was what the candidates made it. There was no Secret Service protection until 1968 after the assassination of Robert Kennedy. Things happened then that simply couldn't happen now. Excuse me. In one motorcade in 1960, a woman threw a glass of whiskey in Kennedy's face as he rode by in his convertible. Kennedy wiped his face, picked up the glass, and handed it back. "Here's your glass, ma'am," he said. In another, an excited reporter reached into the car and fell into Kennedy's lap. The police pulled him out and booked him, and he was fined $1 for disorderly conduct. Neither of those people would survive under current circumstances. Standards have changed in reporting, too. We read about things now that were not mentioned in polite company when I started. Politicians and sex, for example. Kennedy's hyperactive sex life was not known publicly, and it certainly was not known to reporters until after he was dead. Whatever you say about JFK, he knew how to have an affair and keep it secret. Bill Clinton could have taken a lesson from that. All those talkative women. Kennedy's campaigns, of course, were in an era of totally different standards. The fare that's on daily television now would have been X-rated and probably got you banned in Boston in 1960. So I'm not sure what would have been printed even if it had been known, because we cover the society and the society has changed markedly since those days. There also is a big difference between what a reporter hears and what can be confirmed as reportable fact. At least there used to be. That difference is vanishing. Nowadays, rumor becomes fact because people simply say it and repeat it over and over and over again. We didn't do that in my day. If you couldn't nail it down, if you didn't have a reliable source for your information and you couldn't prove it, you didn't write it. That's not so now. In my 11 campaigns, I spent more time covering Senator Barry Goldwater of Arizona, the Republican nominee of 1964, than any other single candidate, 13 months ago. It was a great ride. Goldwater, Mr. Conservative, was accused of shooting from the hip, but he wasn't nearly that careful. He said he couldn't stand to give the same speech every day because he'd have to listen to it himself and he'd get bored. So he kept changing it, which was perfect for reporters, not so good for him. It was the last of the free-form presidential campaigns. Things didn't seem to be on any map, geographic or political. I remember once his motorcade got lost in Dayton and went around in circles. He was way late for a rally. He went places that made no sense. My favorite was Charleston, West Virginia. His chances in West Virginia in 1964 were so far below zero that they would have frozen you. Yet there was a big crowd when his chartered Boeing 727 landed in Charleston, and his people came running back and said to us, "See, we have support even here." So I went over and talked with some of the people in the crowd, and they said they had come to see the airplane, not the candidate. Because it was the first passenger jet ever to land at that airport, which was on a mountain top of a cliff at the end of the runway. There had even been some macabre betting on whether the airplane would stop in time. The 1968 campaign was the most tragic and troubled of my experience. I was in Los Angeles covering the 1968 California primary the night everything changed with the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy. Hubert Humphrey was nominated in Chicago after all the riots without entering a primary, which would be impossible now. Richard Nixon ran a law and order campaign, and Nixon barely won that election, which is a forgotten fact these days. I think Humphrey would have won if he had had the courage to break with Lyndon Johnson in Vietnam. It was the only issue that made the Nixon people nervous. But Humphrey stuck with the war issue and didn't deal with it until it was way too late. I never met so many people who later went to prison as when I covered Nixon's campaign in 1972. It was an election Nixon could not possibly lose. Senator George McGovern never had a chance. So Watergate was not only illegal, it was stupid and pointless. The cheating, sadly, seemed to be a Nixon campaign reflex. I say sadly because I think Nixon was an effective president who accomplished a lot and could have accomplished more, and whose downfall was his own doing. In 1976, Gerald Ford came within 2 points of defeating Jimmy Carter. Again, a remarkable showing for a president who was never elected to anything but Congress, and who appointed a disgraced Nixon before he pardoned him for Watergate crimes. Ford had to fight to win the nomination over Ronald Reagan. I think most of the delegates in that convention would have preferred Reagan, but Republicans were too polite to fire the president, so they waited 4 years for Reagan. Reagan remains the conservative icon. Candidates today still cast themselves as Reagan Republicans. Ironically so, I think, because today's right-wing Republicans would dismiss a man with Reagan's policies as a closet liberal. They would read him out of the party. He was a pragmatist and a president willing to compromise, both unforgivable to today's hard-right Republicans. That campaign produced one of my favorite stories. Reagan told a joke in New Hampshire on the campaign bus, thinking it was off the record. He said, "Not so." It was a Polish joke that wound up being broadcast, and it set off a silly tempest over political correctness. The joke was, how do you tell a Polish guy at the cockfight? He's the one who brings the duck. How do you tell the Italian guy? He bets on the duck. How do you know the mafia was there? The duck wins. Reagan later claimed with a straight face that he had only told that joke to illustrate the kind of ethnic humor of which he did not approve. And he got away with it, proving that he was the Teflon candidate. One more Reagan story. When his age became an issue in 1984, Reagan promised to be attentive to business. From now on, he said, I've told my staff to wake me up if anything happens, even if it is in the middle of a cabinet meeting. A couple more thoughts. Bill Clinton was the best pure campaign politician I ever covered. If you were with him, you were his best friend. No matter how many people were there, everyone was his best friend, especially women, which is what got him into trouble. The Bushes, 41 and 43, used their own incomprehensible words, which we call Bush speak. I was covering in New Hampshire one day when he spoke in a town called Somerset and said, "Don't cry for me, Argentina," which really puzzled the New Hampshire people who didn't know what he was talking about. And I don't think he did either. He once dismissed a tax question he didn't like by saying, "Zippity-doo-dah," and walking away. Or George Bush. Is our children learning? Those gaffes got by mostly then, they wouldn't now. President Obama speaks correctly, but he sometimes creates his own problems with the things he expresses in proper language. Besides serious and studious commentary, is not prized in the TV and Facebook age. I'll close with a thought about the democratic system I covered. There used to be a precept that campaigns had to be run civilly enough to allow the winners to embrace the losers and thus govern effectively. We've lost that, and all the other traditions of civility that I think are crucial to our democracy. The rise of Trump has poisoned the system, I think. And I think whether he wins or loses, we're going to have to find some way to get back to that standard of civility, or we're not going to have a successful government. I hope that the voters will take care of this and insist that we reclaim those standards. I believe that the American way of government is a majestic exercise, and it's demeaned by too much of what is happening now. That's something we need to repair, and I hope that we will. And I thank you all for coming, and anybody that wants to get to the football game is hereby excused.
Thank you.
Any questions that you might have?
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you for your service to our country and protecting our freedom of the press.
Well, I did my best, but I worry.
We are going to open up the floor for questions. Some of you had gotten cards. We're going to do question cards, but I also understand Mr. Mears also likes to engage with the audience.
Don't worry about the card. Just tell me what you want to know.
Okay.
I'll either answer or evade the question. Yes, sir.
You've given us the problem. Have you got the solution?
Well, you're the solution. The only way this gets fixed, if the voters say enough, we won't stand for this, we're going to require a different standard and a different code of conduct. And nobody else can control it. And I was talking with somebody earlier about this sudden interest in Snowden, pardon Snowden and all that stuff. That's not real, that comes from an Oliver Stone movie. We are too often guided by what was on the screen or the television most recently, and not by a serious effort to get at facts and deal with facts. But as I say, I don't know any way that this gets fixed, if the voters don't rebel. And it's hard to rebel when you've got the cast of characters we have right now. My personal view, which being retired I don't hesitate to share, is that Hillary Clinton wouldn't be a very good president, but she wouldn't be dangerous to democracy and government. And I think Donald Trump would be. I think he would be a disaster as president, and I think he could jeopardize our whole system.
To follow up on your comment about it could be our responsibility, how do the schools of journalism play into that as far as educating our journalists and what we get as the public get to hear and get to know about?
Well, I don't think that, one of the great changes in all this over the course of my career has been the fall of the daily newspaper.
Yeah.
When I began, there were 1,800 daily newspapers in the United States, and they were the dominant source of information for most Americans. Television was beginning to come up as a news source in the 50s and certainly in the 60s, but the printed word was still dominant. If you write something down and put your name on it and people read it and it's not so, watch your back. You know, you're held accountable. We've lost the accountability. I don't think it's a problem of teaching it in journalism schools. I think it's a problem of too many of us being most interested in what we last heard and, letting misnamed reality shows dominate the discourse. As I say, the fall of newspapers has been, I think, one of the things that has undermined the flow of responsible information. When's the last time you saw one of these cable TV guys say, "I got that wrong, I apologize"? Never happened. And I think the journalism schools still teach the proper standards. The problem is that they're losing readers, and that too many outfits are just playing for viewers and not worrying about the impact of what they put out there. I mean, Steve Bannon, the guy who is now Trump's campaign chairman, worked for Breitbart News. I mean, there's a contradiction for you. That is the most unlikely source of news that anybody could ever think of. This guy has pretty much vanished. It's interesting. I mean, he's got a proven record as a writer, and as everything he said and did before this time showed him to be a bigot, an anti-Semite, you name it. And yet you never hear a word from him now that he's the chairman of the campaign. They've tried to rein in Trump and made him read his speeches, which apparently he's done a little better since he started doing that than when he was totally winging it, but I don't think he can contain himself. The people surrounding Trump are not the people that I would want in positions of power in any government. It's a frightening time if you're serious about preserving democratic values and civility and having a government that can deliver anything. And I wish I had a simple answer, but I don't, except that we, all of us, voters, we've got to rise up. We've got to say, we're not going to vote for that. We're not going to vote for the people who gave us the state bill that has now driven all the corporate money out of the state that it has, and now may come home to roost because it might force on basketball too. That'll get them. Yes, sir.
I was wondering, do you have some suggestions about 4 or 5 written news sources that you think are credible?
Good.
That we should consider reading? think
Well,
many of us try to read good news, but what are some of the sources that you would rely on?
Brett and I still like to pick up a newspaper and hold it in our hands, so we subscribe to the New York Times. We've been troubled sometimes by the fact that the Times they need tighter editing, they need to be straighter in their stories, there are too many, if you slant a story, you leave yourself wide open to the criticism that you're not telling the truth. And you don't slant stories in print by putting outrageously false information. You do it with slightly slanted words. And I think editors need to be responsible for that and keep them out of the copy. That said, as a 50-year AP guy, I recommend if you want the straight news, go on the internet and ask for AP News. You'll get the top news stories of the country and the world by the Associated Press, which is itself under fire now for its stories on Clinton's appointments as Secretary of State and their relationship with the Clinton Foundation. Some of that I think we were wrong, the AP, aired on, and I would have done it differently if I'd been executive editor, but I think that is a rare exception. I think the straightest place you can get stuff is there. The New York, the Washington Post, I think, does a very good job on the political campaign. Their chief political guy, Dan Balz, is as good a reporter as you're going to find. And if you see his name on a story, you can trust him.